Hello and welcome to another comedian's interview for my blog Arichcomiclife. My name is Richard Gill and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 800 stand-up comedians and counting over the last 46 years. I am honoured to say that my special guest today is Mr. Al Murray. Yes!
Hello,
mate. How are you?
How you doing?
It's great to see you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Total pleasure.
Thank you. It's going to be, as I say, it's going to be about an hour long, the interview. It's going to be about your comedy career. So we're going to go right back to the start.
Yes.
In my mind, I think you're the best character comedian in Britain. Yes. How did you become a comedian in the first place?
Oh, well, I did a lot of acting at school and playing music, and I was really bitten by it. I thought I really want to do this, but I had no idea how. I had no notion of how I might get round to being able to do that. And there was no there was no careers advice back in the mid 80s that said, well, do a stand-up comedy course or go to London and work your way up through the club scene. It just, it was an abstract thing, and there were comedians. There was Billy Connolly, and there was Kelly Monteith, and then there was the sort of young ones. Although you didn't know that they were stand-ups, because how could you know that? And Victoria Wood, and it basically looked like all the jobs in stand-up had been taken by these sort of half dozen people. And then when I got to university, I decided I was going to do some performing, and try and join some societies and sort of have a go. But that was as far as my sort of plan went. But on my first day at uni, I met Stuart Lee and Richard Herring, in the college music room where I took my drum set, and they were about to put on a production of the Edinburgh show they'd just done, and they'd been to the Fringe, so they were like sort of astronauts. They'd been to the moon, even though they'd played to nobody. But that wasn't the point. They'd done it.
Yeah.
And they were putting a show on. I said, how'd you get involved in that? And they told me about this thing where you had to, called the Oxford Review Comedy Workshop, where you had to go and you had to do new stuff. So I went to that every other Sunday, wrote some stuff, got into it, completely loved doing it, and basically sort of thought, well, this is what I want to do. And then out the other end of it, there was a club circuit, and you bought a copy of Time Out, and you rang all the numbers in Time Out, and worked your way around and got in, and got into the club scene, and that's how I became a comic. And there never was a point in my life where I thought, when I was a youngster, I thought, oh God, I want to be a stand-up comic, because it just didn't seem like an option. Right. And certainly not my family background. It didn't seem like a thing you'd do.
Yeah.
And then I just ended up doing it, and partly to sort of prolong student life and the mucking about and getting up late in the morning and the sort of not having to take anything too seriously, which is what I love, why I got into it. Then of course you realise, actually, if I'm going to do this properly, I've got to take it terribly seriously. Maybe not myself too seriously, but the thing, you've got to take it extremely seriously. And that's my superhero origin story, and certainly when I first started out, Stuart Lee he was in a year above me at uni, and he'd gone to London and had started to get work.
Right.
And you know what you're like when you're 21, 22. I thought, well, if he can do it, I could do that. He's not. I remember thinking, Stu's not that good, or I'm funnier than Stu. The way you do when you're a kid, I can do that. And so I sort of didn't stop to think twice about it. Just got into it.
That's fantastic. What sort of year was this? Are we talking then?
So 1991 was when I sort of, when I came to London, right, and started trying to get going. And I used to work quite a lot with a guy called Jim Tavray, who's based in the US now. And I got a gig opening for him in Edinburgh in 91, I think. And that was that's when you think, well, I'm going to try being a comedian then. I hadn't worked out, the character was a long way off at this point. I hadn't sort of thought about really what I wanted to do. I just wanted to sort of get to grips with it and see if I could do it and see if I could make people laugh. As an end in itself, you know what I mean? There wasn't any thought of doing telly or anything like that.
Yeah. My first year in London was 1992.
Yeah.
And I would go to the Comedy Store every week,
Right.
but before that, growing up, I grew up in Carlisle, and I went to college in Stoke, and I did business studies there, and we saw Ben Elton in Stoke in the 80s, and then we went to Carlisle and about a month or so later I saw Rick Mail, and I mean, that was just incredible. He started off, he kept calling the audience ladies and gentlemen of the Carl, which was brilliant, and he jumped on and his trousers exploded, and the person sitting next to me was not laughing, so he threw him out. It was absolutely
Fantastic.
Brilliant. And the pub landlord, we're going to come on to this, it's very much like that. He's absolutely fearless, and you remind me of certainly of the character like that, where Rick Mail is so confident. It's a completely different character, but it's this confidence that's extraordinary whenever you go on the stage, because I've seen you so many times over the years.
Well, yes, I mean I remember when I was doing a holiday job when I was at uni, one of the guys I was working with saying he'd seen Rick Mail in Aberdeen, and that it was basically Aberdeen Union. It was basically completely mind expanding.
Yeah, it was like unbelievable.
Unbelievable for the time, you know, like there was just nothing like it. I mean, I never saw any. I sort of never saw anything like this live. I think the first sort of comics I saw live properly were probably, I think the first person I probably saw do an hour and a half was probably Jerry Sadowitz. You know because I got straight into doing it rather than going to see it a lot, and then you basically see people when you're doing open spots, and you see people you're working with. I mean, I remember when I first started out, it was me and a mate had a double act that we thought we'd try, and that didn't last very long, because I was much more sort of deliberately robust about, you know, we died, doesn't matter, we got to dust ourselves down, figure out what went wrong. And I can't speak for him, but I always used to get the feeling he was finding that harder than me, and I was very resolved to, like, you know, you just got to get in there and grip it and cope with it and deal with it, you know, and the aim here is to make people laugh. You know, like I was very bullish about it. I remember we saw Eddie Izzard 3 times in 1 week, comparing. One in a club in Hampton Wick, I think, once, and then at the Comedy Store, and then somewhere else. And I remember the first night we're going, my God, he's literally making up as he goes along. This is incredible. How is this even possible? And then the second night you're thinking, he's still kind of making up as he goes along. This is, you know, some of the same sort of compare-y things from last night. And the third night you're like, what? and you learn a lot, like from a thing like that.
So you're watching the comedy, but you're also doing it as well. What was your first ever gig like, and where was it, and what year?
Well, my first gig proper, I think first thing I would call a gig was at uni,
right?
Where there was, like I said, there was this thing every 2 weeks, every 2 Sundays, in a cellar underneath one of the union buildings, where you had to write new stuff. You had to go on. There were probably 40 people in there, and all the people would be comedians lurking at the back, and the bar, and the compere would call you up, you know, and you'd do your bit. And I bullied some friends into doing this sketch, or being in a sketch group with me. And we had a sketch called the French Revolution sketch, where we had a piano, and our heads would be lifted up onto the thing like this, and you'd all go, oh God, what a nightmare, you know. And lots of, an awful lot of, I think, puns and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that probably counts as my first gig. And the reason it counts as my first gig, I think, is because we wrote a thing, we learned the thing. The rehearsed is too strong. We learned the thing, wrote the thing, learned the thing, performed the thing, and got laughs for it, and came away thinking, gosh, that works and that's good. And that, rather than being paid, that feels to me like the first gig I would have done. But then my first paid stuff was in, you know, the summer of '91, opening for people, you know, when I sort of got the old act together that I used to do.
Right. So, I mean, I've been racking my brains all day, because I've certainly seen your machine gun routine on stage. and I can't remember when it was. How did that come about?
Well, that was basically it's a pub trick, doing sound effects, left over from being a kid playing with toys and stuff, and
because it is superb.
But it's also that a PA can make anything sound like anything if you know how to use it properly. There was another guy called Chris Luby who also did a sort of special effects, sound effects act at the time, and there's the guy in the Police Academy films. His name escapes me right now.
Michael Winslow.
That's right. Yeah. It's that basically, and that sort of developed in my last year at uni, and it was part of a show we did in Edinburgh, and then I thought, well, this is 15-20 minutes. And it was very sort of black, bleak humour. I was killing everything and all this sort of stuff, which seemed to fit being like in my early 20s, where you think you're indestructible, and if it went well in a club, it would absolutely smash. But the big problem with it is I just couldn't expand it, and it was a novelty and all that sort of thing. And I really thought I could do better than this, but I don't. But God knows what, And I did it on The Word. I met Nirvana on The Word in '91.
How cool is that?
well, at the time they just released Teen Spirit, so it was like, oh, this is kind of hip, but it was also totally bewildering because it was television, and you're thinking, what's going on, and where do I stand, and what do I look at, and are any of these people in the studio actually going to laugh, or are they just going to stand around like it's Top of the Pops, and that was a very odd experience, but I did the act. I had my old floppy fringe and tuxedo with bloodstains on it, and for a while that paid my rent, but then rent in London back then was a lot cheaper.
I don't know, I've survived in this room, I tell you, but this wonderful 45-degree angle bookcase, otherwise prison cell. Let's move on to the pub landlord. How did your principal character come about? How was he created? How did he come about?
Well, by accident. So when I first moved to London, I started doing stand-up, and I also started trying to write for radio, because there used to be this satire show called Weekending.
Yeah.
And they had an open house on a Wednesday where you could just go in and pitch to the producer, and then he'd go, yeah, I'll have that, and I'll have that, and then you'd come in on the Thursday with the finished item. And I think that's how it worked. And that sort of like there was a sort of track off that could get you work at Radio Light Entertainment, and they had a producer bursary as well. So everyone applied for that. And I remember Rich Herring not getting it and being furious. And then, but it also led to writing on other things, including Spitting Image, which was still going at the time. And I did that, and we got commissioned, me and the guys I was writing with, and then so we're on the commission team who met after the non-coms, and Harry Hill was one of the new commissions when Jon Magnuson, who's Graham Norton's producer, or was for an extremely long time, when he brought Harry in, because he'd seen Harry on the circuit, brought him in on a commission, and Harry was just like different to everyone else because he wasn't coming at it like all the news hacks who, there's a book about Weekending called Prime Minister, You'll See Me Now, because that's basically how every sketch would start, because you couldn't rely on the impressions to necessarily tell you who was in the sketch. Come in, Foreign Secretary. Yes, it's about this. That's how you'd set the sketches up. And Harry came in, and we hit it off on that. And I remember thinking this guy's really different, because it was when Leaves on the Line was the thing, the railway story, Leaves on the Line, and everyone was laughing at that. And he wrote a sketch about an enormous conker rolling in front of the tunnel, and you think, right, well, this guy's got a different approach, And we hit it off. We became friends, and he asked me to be in his radio show at the time called Fruit Corner, and also asked me to go to Edinburgh with him and do voices in his shows. And that was a very good way of going to Edinburgh, because he'd like pay my rent, so it would defray my costs. It made Edinburgh more possible. And we used to muck about with his mate Matt Bradstock, who's sadly no longer with us. Used to do Little Alan in his show, and then in his stage show, play his adopted son. and they were old medical school friends. And Matt played the keyboards and was a really brilliant sort of busking keyboarder. You'd say to him, you know, Knights in White Satin, you'd just be able to play it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
He's an amazing bloke. So we jammed together in our flat. So I'd taken a drum kit up to Edinburgh with me, because I was in a thing with Dave Cohen called Guns N' Moses, who was supposed to be the world's first Jewish heavy metal band.
Brilliant.
And well, yeah, it's not really worth pausing on that. It's good if it went well. It went very well. If it didn't, it didn't. That was with Jim Tever as well. Anyway, so we start jamming in the flat, and we basically come together with this set of stuff and call ourselves the Pub Band. And I was into playing the Fringe Club back in the day, and I said to Harry, we should take the band down the Fringe Club. This will absolutely kill in there. I just know it. And him and Matt said, yeah, all right. And they never were Fringe Club people. So he said, yeah, all right, because it's a bit of a bear pit back in the day. And we went and did it, and we absolutely killed with this stuff we'd just been like playing in the kitchen. And we said to each other that night over a beer afterwards, well, we're going to have to do this next year in some shape or form. So we came back next year. Plan was to come back next year with this thing called the Pub Band.
Right.
And Harry would do some stand-up, and they'd do some sketches and bits and pieces together. And we made a film. And I was supposed to come up with the comparing thing, the linking thing. And the thing I came up with, which I shall not dwell on, was shit, right? No two ways of going at it. I thought it was really funny. It wasn't, right? It wasn't, right? And sometimes you have to admit that. And we did some warm-ups at the Camden Head in Islington. Yeah. And I would resolutely stiff every night doing this new thing. And so when we got to Edinburgh, I still hadn't figured out what I was going to do. I was just the drummer in the pub band.
Yeah.
And on the opening night, I said to Harry, look, why don't I say, I'll go on and I'll say that the compere hasn't turned up. So the barman here in the cabaret bar at the Pleasance has offered to fill in. And
wow.
Harry kind of like said, yeah, whatever. You know, another one of your bright ideas. I'm sure it would be brilliant. But he was always he was very, very good at styling through moments like that, Harry. And I said, and so I sat and he said, all right. So I wrote a load of things down, bits and pieces, and I went on because I had a suit for being a drummer in the band. I went on and I went, right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So I had the voice immediately, and then but I did him very hesitant. He didn't want to be on. He was like, I've been kind of forced on at gunpoint, which is one of the things. One of the things that has changed and changed quite quickly, is the truth, is the idea that he goes on and he loves it. You know, he's enjoying being the centre of attention.
Yeah.
And which is, I've since even dropped that. So, and it went really well. Then Harry went on and did his 40 minutes. And while he was on, I wrote some more linking bits, brought the boys on for their little bit. Then we had the film, then we did the band. And the next day I said, well, I had clippers. I said, cut my hair off. I should be bald for this. The pub landlord should be a bald guy. And we did the rest of the run. We got a Perrier nomination, you know, a comedy award in the Old Money, and which was very exciting. And the show was a smash, right?
That's brilliant.
And then we went on tour, and basically we had to put an interval in, so I had to do more comparing. Yeah. And the next thing I knew, at the end of that tour, by March of the following year, the following spring, 95, I had an act. Just a whole act. Yeah. And it grew and grew and grew. And I had an hour's material by the end of that tour.
Yeah. Wow,
and a character. And I think the reason it worked is it's dead simple. It's a simple proposition. The barman's gone on. And, you know, so he can be anything. He can be, you don't have to define him. So he can be anything. It's not like saying a policeman's doing, because that would be different.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's as open-ended as a cab driver, to be honest, which I think it would have been 30 years previous, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And we went on tour, and also Harry works really hard, and his thing was be funny, be funny, be funny, be funny. It's the thing he has for himself. And I just sort of, by the end of the tour, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I had a character that was a bottomless pit for material because it's an attitude, because it's a point of view.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
It's not too hemmed in, and then I got on the club circuit and rang all the people that knew I could do the sound effects and said, you know, I've got a new thing. And some of them went, well, you know, back to the back of the queue, mate. And others were generous enough to trust me with it, and I got into do it, really hammering the comedy circuit to get good, and that's how it came about. No plan, no clue, you know.
That's
and certainly
how all the best things start, I think.
Well, maybe, and certainly, it was designed to fill 5 minutes, and I'm still doing it like 27 years later. It's ridiculous. Thank you.
And talking about Harry Hill, he still holds the record for me for the best opening line ever to a gig. I first saw him downstairs at the King's Head, something like 1992.
Was this with a mousetrap on his nose?
No.
Right,
he brushed past me and he climbed up onto the stage and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really sorry I'm late. I had to have a testicle brought down," and paused and everybody laughed. And then he said, "From Derby."
Yeah.
And when I met him, I told him that and he went, yeah, I'm still telling that 30 years later. He's wonderful.
He's brilliant. He had the one with the mousetrap on his nose, and he wouldn't say anything about it for he'd leave it 3-4 minutes and go, "Do you ever get that feeling when you do absolutely anything for a piece of cheese?" Anyway,
that's like the first gig I ever saw was Tommy Cooper. In Scarborough in the 70s, and the curtains opened. He's lying on a bed, and there's one woman in the crowd laughing, and it trickles round, so everybody's laughing. And after about 5 minutes, he pops his head up. He said, "What? Somebody come on!" And it's that originality that is super.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on to Edinburgh. I go to the Edinburgh Fringe every year. I'm very lucky to go. I've been going since 2005. And I see about 50 shows in a week that I go there. It's just it's an incredible experience. What was your first Edinburgh Fringe like?
Well, my first Edinburgh Fringe was in '88 with a student company doing a kids show.
Right.
And then we did our sketch show in the basement of the same venue. That was this big empty building that the theatre club that we were attached to had converted into a venue. So that was with my sketch show buddies. My first proper Fringe was I did the Comedy Zone, as it was called. It's still called that, isn't it? Yeah. In I think in 91,
right,
or 92, I can't remember. With Harry and Brenda Gilhooly doing Gail, Tuesday Page 3 Stunner, and Andre Vincent.
Wow, what a bill!
Well, we were real, and you look at that picture, and we're like Muppet Babies on it. It's and that was it's funny. I stopped doing Edinburgh for a bit for the first few years of the sort of most of the 2000s,
right?
Because I'd had kids and you sort of and also kind of I'd got to the point where I kind of think, well, I've done this. I've sort of completed the Fringe end of it. But I started going again in 2009, and I can't express how much I love the Edinburgh Fringe, and I can't express how much. Both. Oh God, it's just the most amazing thing.
Yeah.
And you'd never invent it if you were starting a thing from scratch. You'd never come up with that because it's too improbable. It's evolved in such a spectacular way. It's just the most amazing festival, and there's all this advocacy that you end up. I get slightly fed up when every year there's an article about how it's not as good as it used to be, and you sort of think, look around you. I mean, honestly, and it's even if I mean, when I first started going, there was a lot of talk about the three big venues that were going to overpower the Fringe: the Pleasance and the Assembly Rooms and the Gilded Balloon. A lot of tutting and sucking of teeth about that. And now and you think, but the Pleasance was only 3 rooms at the time, or 4 rooms at the time. It's something, what? And the way it's expanded, and also it's a direct product of the I often find some of my older peers who get hung up on this idea it's not as good as it used to be. You sort of think, no, this is a direct product of the idea of that the arts are for everyone. Yeah. This is a direct product of lots more universities offering arts or drama or media degrees. This is what you're going to get. You're going to get more and more people involved in the arts. There's been an explosion in it, and that can only be a good thing. And I love going. I love staggering around, basically going, holy crap, look at all the stuff that's on. I'll never get to see any of this. But dear God, it's amazing. And the thing I really love doing, and we did it for a while in the sort of 2010, 2011, 2012. I used to do this quiz in an afternoon. It was a £5 because I sort of thought I can't come up and like milk being well known here. I've got to come up and do something, you know. And one review gave us 1 star and told us it was disastrously ill conceived. You think, great, brilliant. It kind of is. We're just pissing around in the afternoon for a £5. You know, isn't that the point of? Isn't that the spirit of the Fringe? You know,
exactly.
And I just love it. And I sort of and I kind of think when people go, it's not as good as it used to be, and that you need to change this to improve it. You think, well, the problem with that is when you pull a lever, it always something will change in a way that you don't expect, and you could skew it. You know, obviously, you know, rent and all that is a big issue for acts, but you just sort of think, yeah, but if you change that, what other distortion might occur? And the main thing that has changed, and without a shadow of a doubt for the better, is the city's more into it. The city used to basically, you know, they tear down all the fly posters. They didn't. They kind of acted like in the you know 80s and 90s. Used to act like it wasn't happening. Like it was.
Wow.
Yeah, and you think, my God, you know, the money that's bringing into the city. Anyway.
Yeah. I go to Carlisle every summer. Carlisle's my home city, so I'm only an hour away from it. And when I step off the train at Waverley, the atmosphere just hits you. And then you meet up with all your mates and you just have the best time. And I, like my blog, I do a big spreadsheet of who I'm going to see and everything and fit everybody.
Yeah.
It's just the best thing when you go and do it. And
I mean, every year I make sure, usually on the first day I'm there, I go and sit in the Pleasance courtyard, have a pint of Guinness, because I've done that. I've done that since, you know, 1991.
You and me both, my friend.
And even though the Pleasance is different, because there's more in there, it's exactly the same. Exactly the same place, the same vibe, the same thing of people going there because they have to, because they need to, because they need it to happen. They need to do it. They need to go through it. And it's there being no Fringe last year was sort of heartbreaking, really, but obviously inevitable, but completely heartbreaking.
It really was. Right, I have seen your pub landlord shows, mainly at the Fringe. I'm going to rattle them off. I've seen Compete for the Meat in 2010, where you're still doing prizes to this day at Always Be Comedy, similar prizes. The Only Way is Epic in 2012, just phenomenal. One Man, One Governor in 2014, and Landlord of Hope and Glory in 2019. Please, can you describe... if you have a writing process, or how do you get your ideas for a show?
So the process tends to be it kind of works in a 2-year cycle normally. So we have a tour booked in and the deadline starts to loom, and I get out the old tour and I look at all the lists for the old tour. And they tend to be incomprehensible. And you think, well, what's that bit? And the list tends to be from the start of the tour before the thing is sort of, you know, mutated and shone itself up into something that works properly. And then I look at the things I didn't use and think, is there anything in any of that, right? Because very often, you know, because very early on when I started writing, I saved everything. I saved literally everything. I've got a file called Year 1, Pub Landlord Year 1, Year 2, Year 3. I saved absolutely everything, wrote everything out.
Wow.
Rewrote everything again and again and again. And then the process got easier when I sort of found the comic voice. I didn't have to write stuff down quite so much.
Right.
But basically, I decide, well, what's this show gonna be about? In general, you know, what's the vibe of the show? So One Man, One Governor, or Only Way is Epic, I think. I never can remember which show's which, but one of them I decided, right, politics is the thing I'm talking about this year. So this is the year where the governor decides that he's going to be interested in politics, because we were all being told that comedians ought to be interested in politics. And I find the idea of the pub landlord being interested in politics really funny, like, because he's going to get it wrong, or he's going to end up uttering some truth without realizing he's doing so, and all that sort of thing. So you think, right, I'll frame it out, and then you look at what kind of where you're going to end up. And I tend to work backwards. I tend to decide this is where we're going to end the show, and we work backwards. And then what I do is there's a little fringe theatre here in Chiswick where I live called the Tabard.
Yeah.
And they have a like 50 seat room. And I do like 5 o'clock on a Monday afternoon. I do sort of 3 of those, and I got the list on a piece of paper on a stool, and I'll look at it if I have to, but I'll to knock me forward. And basically then what happens is I write the show with the audience, because that's who writes. You don't write comedy on your own ever. Some people write in pairs, and that obviously must be, you know, I've written in writers' rooms, but so the thing is you'll spur each other on. You go, that works, that doesn't work, I don't know about that. Maybe a different way of looking at that. And that's, you know, and that's what an audience does for you. They tell you which bits are funny by laughing at them, and they tell you which bits are overlong by losing interest, or they indicate which bits could be extended and all that sort of thing. It's a, you know, and I've come more and more to the belief that you know, stand up is a collaborative process between the audience and the comedian, and so we do kind of like 3 Mondays like that, and then I'll fill a week. I'll do a whole week or 4 in a week, and we do it at 5 o'clock, so that what we don't get is people going, oh, Al Murray's on. I've seen him a couple of times on the telly. To run a thing up, I really need people who know what I'm about.
Yeah.
Rather than having to go first principles, explain the pub landlord. You know, I can hit the ground running. They're there to see me, so they know roughly what they're going to get. Yeah. And then you give them a new thing. And then the other thing I make sure I do is look at all the audience beats that I've used, because the audience interaction, it's sort of 4/5 to 7/8 improvised, but there are solid bits, marks I have to hit to tie it together, to do the bit where you hop off from the improv into the set.
Wow.
Which is the hardest join in a theatre show. It's the hardest part, is that join, is where you jump out of the improv. And so I cross off the things that are the regular beats, and then I maybe look at some of the sort of replies that have become a bit too standard. But the thing I've changed, the thing I changed most in the last 2 big shows was not doing the improv from kickoff. Because I used to just come on and go, who's that? I go, good evening, cheers, who are you? And now I come on and go, right, this is what we're here to do. This is what we're going to talk about. These are the subjects. And I just, and basically get the show up. And I go, but before we can do that, I've got to know who I'm dealing with.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we do the improv. And I've found actually that's I've kind of got a lot better at, it's a thing I really wanted to work on and really improve, and I've got a lot better at that, of setting out my stall at the start, because then you've rather than arriving at the subject matter, you're laying down the boundaries and all that. So that's been the process the last 2 or 3 shows. But really, you know, David Chase, who wrote The Sopranos, he's very funny about the writing process, because he said, you know, when people say to me in that episode, where did that idea come from? And he goes, the writer's room. We were on a deadline. You know, it was the best idea in the room at the time, for God's sake. You know, the reason he ends up doing that is because we had an episode to fill.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's being modest, but he's also being, because it's such a brilliant show, he's being completely truthful.
Yeah.
Sometimes the reason you end up talking about, you know, I had a long sequenced routine a couple of shows ago about how the world's financial markets worked. The reason I ended up writing that is because I ended up writing that.
I was just going to bring that up, because you went through every accent around the world.
Yes,
and it was just
right.
Fantastic. I was in the audience watching that. Yeah. Yeah, I just remember. And that is fascinating, because the other thing, of course, as well, is what you're brilliant at is the audience interaction. And I love the way, certainly seeing you live, you get members of the audience to go off and get you a drink.
Yeah.
And well, why not? Like that. But it's a great way of getting them involved in your show and getting them on your side, and then you can say practically whatever you want. You know, if you've got your plan ready to go, it's fascinating. You are absolutely fearless and hysterical on stage. Do you ever suffer from any nerves, and how do you cope with them? Yeah,
sometimes. I mean, if I've not done it in a long time, sometimes I can get just out of sort of and if it's a brand new show and I don't know it, then I'll get nervous.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get nervous at sort of the big fixtures. So like a Royal Variety Show, you're entitled to a few butterflies because you don't want to fuck up in front of the Queen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And the last one of those I did, I'd lost my voice and I ended up having to go on even though I'd lost my voice, because they couldn't cut me. And that really was like a walk to the gallows. Oh. And I don't know, but no, to be honest, I tend not to. Yeah. Sometimes, I mean, the thing is one of the things I've been very lucky to do is get to the point where I tend to do shows on my own. So I'm in charge of the thing right from the beginning, the music that they're listening to when they're coming in, the whole thing, right? Right. And sometimes if I'm on a bill and someone goes, well, I get butterflies because I'm thinking, right, they're laughing at this. Are they going to laugh at me? So they're not necessarily here for me. And what am I going to have to unpick that the other comic's done, And because I've had support acts on tours with me a couple of times. And if they're, and both times it was a guy called Jason Freeman a long time ago. And then Chris Ramsey about 10 years ago. Brilliant, yeah. And Chris was brilliant. And some nights you'd have to come on and go, forget about him, you're here for me, right? And that weirdly can make me nervous because it's not the normal setting. It's not. You're literally trying to create a comfort zone for yourself on stage. Yeah. And that wasn't it. So I don't know. I tend not to, and I think it's not because, sometimes people say, oh, you need to be a bit nervous. Well, I don't know that I do. I don't know how helpful that is. I'd rather not be nervous. I'd rather be not having to think, oh, I got some. What am I doing about the butterflies? Because then you're not thinking about what you're doing. But I'm always adrenalized when I'm on stage, but not necessarily nervous. They are different things, and they're different sides of the same coin. And if you can get a handle on it, on nerves. If you can get them under control, or if you can decide to ride them, to use them, they can be. They aren't necessarily a bad thing. I know some people are terribly nervous about going, or say they are terribly nervous about going on stage. Some people who do it a lot, and you sort of think, wow, why are you putting yourself through this then? But every now and again, butterflies and a bit of churn,
What is fascinating to see watching you live though is when you do talk a lot to the audience, but you always have a comeback. You always have a comeback straight away, and it's a very intelligent, clever, funny line. Yeah. And that must come just with experience of touring, or keep doing it, or
yeah. And that's also him. The thing I got into audience interaction because one of the first people I saw when I was first starting out was Julian Clary, and he used to be brilliant at it. And I saw him a couple of times. Then you realise, okay, he's got his formulas here. He's got his things he's looking for. And he's got his ways of coming back. But what he was doing is he was telling you what he was like by talking to you rather than talking at you. Yeah. He was showing you his character by responding to the moment and literally acting in the moment, right? And I think when you're doing a character, one of the simplest ways of letting people know what they're like is rather than tell a joke, behave like that person, right? And the pub landlord would come on and go, you're drinking the wrong drink. Why are you with that? Why are you with that bloke? Look at him, he's a loser. He would do that. He would do that, right? So I don't have to come on and say I'm the kind of guy that would do this, or worse still, aren't the people that do this a nightmare, right? The sort of third-hand version of what the pub landlord can be. So I do it because I like seeing it. I love watching it. I toured with Frank Skinner early on when I started out, supported him, and he was amazing at it, and he always is amazing at it. And he's amazing at remembering people a lot later on and dropping them back in and all that, which is, I've blatantly lifted. But it is, what I like about it is it's different every night. It's what the pub landlord would do. Yeah, he wouldn't he wouldn't respect the conventions of being on stage that you don't do that. And also the thing for me as a performer is it means it is definitely different every night. So I won't go mad. I have the profoundest respect for the people who can do the same set every night for 120 shows identically. I don't know how they do it without going bonkers, right? Yeah. So it's different for me every night. And it says to the audience, tonight's the night. There will not be another night like tonight because you won't get this same combination of people. It cannot happen. So it packages all those things together.
Well, it does. what I personally love, if I can just say, is that you've collared my laugh. You always say your laugh's too loud, or Rich, nobody's reading your blog, which I absolutely love, and of course they all do. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's so well done. You have also appeared on TV many times. You mentioned before with Harry Hill, but you've also written with Richard Herring and starred in your own sitcom, Time Gentlemen Please.
Yeah.
What are the differences between TV comedy and live stand-up?
Well, the thing about live stand-up, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I haven't been doing very much, obviously. The thing about live stand-up is you never have to sign off on it.
Right.
It's in a permanent state of evolution, and you can, unless you make a DVD, or a video or a special, whatever, at the end of a tour. You tend to want to make them at the end of the tour when you know it inside out. Then what you've got there is you've got the opportunity to perfect. Whereas with television, what you've got to do at some point is sign off on it, hand it over, and then it goes out, and you can't change it. And you can't go, oh, hang on a minute, that joke's the wrong way round. I should do it the other way around, or maybe I've got just the wrong word here, or the wrong word order, or the wrong rhythm, or any of that. It goes out, and it no longer belongs to you. It's gone. And when we did Time Gents, I went to a few edits for the first few. Then I realised that I had nothing to contribute to the edits whatsoever. I realised that actually we had, and I know a lot of people like to go to edits and all that. I realised we had a brilliant editor, we had a brilliant director. There was just nothing that I could do. And also, even if there was nothing I could do about the performance I'd delivered the night before. So the best thing to do is concentrate on getting the performance right. You know, me do my bit, and helping to get the script in shape. Although Rich did the lion's share of the work on that. You know, me do my bit, them do theirs. Because what you have to do is sign off and it hand over. You have at some point to go, right, okay, it doesn't belong to me anymore. And when we did the talk show, Happy Hour, we very much got into this thing where I would say, right, well, we're gonna write a sort of 15-20 minute interview, or 18-20 minute interview. You need 12, you might need 10, depending on maybe one runs long, one runs short. But I will do that 18-minute interview, and I will not do any retakes. And you will, because I don't buy it. I don't buy going back and trying again in this circumstance. We're trying to create as live a moment as possible, as real, a vibrant and existing moment as possible that will come across on television, because the way we've set the studio up, the cameras up. So what I'm not going to do is go back and do it again and again and again until you think I've got it right. I'm going to get it right. I'm going to deliver the best performance I can. But what I'm absolutely not going to do is try and do it again. And the people, I remember one of the producers I worked with really had to get their head around that, because that wasn't what you do. And if you go to a panel show, you'll know they shoot until the last minute. The last minute of studio time that they've got. You know, they've got 3 hours on the studio floor, so they will use every last minute. They've got the crew, the multi-camera is so expensive, they'll go to the last minute. And I used to say, no, if we can get this done in an hour and a half, because we're making 45 minutes of television, then we're probably taking too long over it. Because I'm going to know what I'm doing. Yeah. I'm going to be on it. And of course, I trust you to get the angles and the shots and the, blah, blah, blah. And then if that happened, I was much more comfortable on handing it over. Of course, because you've got to make decisions. And I think the reason they do it on panel shows is because the comics aren't in charge of the decision making. They've got to turn up, they've got to do their bit, and then they get cut to the cloth that the producer wants for the half hour. And I wasn't interested in doing that because I wanted to stay in control of the moment where essentially you hand it over. And you hand it over and you go, there's nothing in there that you don't want in there. Whereas you can go on a panel show and you might say something and they use that rather than the bit you think's good. You know what I mean? So, also, a long-winded way of explaining why I don't do panel shows.
I've been to a lot of TV recordings. I've been to a lot of chat shows. I've been to a lot of quiz shows. And one of the best I went to was Have I Got News for You? And it was the first time Bruce Forsyth was on.
Yeah.
and nobody knew, and he was insistent on going straight through.
Yep.
And he went straight for exactly that reason. And you can hear me as clear as a bell. There's a bit where he's playing "Play Your Iraqi Cards Right."
Yeah.
And he's trying to read an autocue, and he goes da 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 da, and I am crying with laughter above Ian Hislop's head.
Yeah.
And I look, and he looks around, and he goes, "Please, please, this is satire." And I'm on video forevermore. But I was amazed how he just wanted to go straight through it. Parkinson was another one. He wouldn't stop and start with his chat show. He wanted to get the interview straight through.
Yeah.
And I can completely understand why with you.
Well, it's because you've got to hand it over. So what you want to do is hand it over in as near as, damn it, the state you want it to go out in. And you know that's about, but that's also that. So that's doing telly, but and how it compares to doing stand-up. I mean, the thing is, the grass is always greener. When you're on a stand-up tour, you're thinking, God, have I got to go up the M6 again? Not this service station again. You know, I've got restaurants where they know me in Manchester. You know, because we tend to do is hub out of the larger cities. So you know, if we're up in the northwest, we'll stay in Manchester and commute. And so when you're doing that, you think, God, I wish I was in a TV studio with a runner going and getting me what I want. But then when you're doing TV, because you've got to do this sign-off thing, which I find very stressful.
Yeah.
You're thinking, God, I wish it was just the two of us on the motorway going somewhere, and and bashing in the front row of a theatre rather than having to make all these bloody decisions and take all this responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. In 2015, as the pub landlord,
yes,
you ran as an MP for South Thanet.
Yeah.
Describe that experience. because my dad, God bless his soul, was a union man. He was president of NALGO.
Right,
and
wow.
His legacy was that his union with two other unions, he formed Unison.
Right.
And God bless him. That was him.
Wow.
So describe this experience of your foray into politics.
That came about because that was the year after I'd been doing the show that was about politics, right? And there was obviously something in the wind, and I'd done a gig in Cambridge and gone to see one of I got a really old friend who was allowed to tell me what he thinks of the act in a way that no one else is, right? And he has license, you know. Right, and he said he said to me, he said at the pub, you know, I enjoyed that greatly. He said, you're going to run, and this was in December of 2014. So you're going to run for election in January, aren't you? You're going to put yourself up, declare for election, aren't you? Because it was, 5-year rule. You knew it was coming, right? And I said, well, yeah, of course I am. And he said, you got to go where's Farage running? It's got to be there, isn't it? It's got to be there. All right. I'm like, yeah, what a great idea. So and then I said, well, we'll call it the Free United Kingdom Party, FUKP.
That is priceless.
and this is literally the conversation in the pub. I say, hang on a minute, I'll just ring my manager. I ring my manager, he goes, what a brilliant idea. Yeah. I'll get on it right now. Right. So he went on the Electoral Commission website to find out how you do it, how you form a political party. And by the morning we were piecing the thing together and trying to buy advertising space. And the whole idea, and it came about because that was the year, Russell Brand had said, don't vote, don't change nothing, right? And I think we can with the benefit of, he was wrong at the time and he's definitely wrong with hindsight. You have to look at the EU referendum. It definitely changes stuff, voting. Without a shadow of a doubt, no two ways about it, it changes stuff, right? And I thought, well, I haven't got his platform. No one's going to take me seriously if I, pipe up and say, by the way, old chap, I think you ought to vote. So so the motivation was to do something that said to people, vote. And maybe at the same time, isn't some of the way we go about this absurd, right? Which is, strikes me as a pretty standard, pretty bog standard thing that a comedian might do around election time. Of course, there was a massive blossoming of conspiracy theories. And this is 6 years ago, so Twitter wasn't anything like as vicious as it is now. But I had all these kippers on my timeline telling me I was in the pay of the EU, pay of the BBC, pay of David Cameron, who's my cousin, which is obviously which is not true, and all this sort of stuff, and conspiracy theories swirling around me, and they're going, who's paying you? And they said some of them are going, we all know who's paying you. So, well, who? Go on, tell me, because I need to know who to invoice. What are you on about? Help me out here. And they'd go, well, there's no way you can afford it. And I said, just look at my tour dates and tell me I can't afford to do this. I can't afford the 500 quid to enter an election. And it was fascinating because it was an insight into the way a lot of people think and all that. And also, I came out of it, and the surprising thing is I came out of it quite sympathetic towards politicians in a weird way, because I know some of them are in it for the money, and I know some of them are in for like the thrills of power or whatever. Yeah. But some really are genuinely, sincerely people who want to make the world a better place. Or obviously some of them on either side think that, and they're possibly going about it the wrong way. But that's genuinely their motivation, right? For some of them, and yet all we want them to do, actually, the thing that really satisfies is if they screw up, and especially the media really want them to screw up, really want them to say a thing out of line that they can run a story with, because that's a better story than politicians says things. Right? And so I ended up with quite a bit of sympathy, because you don't have to do it. No one has to run for office of any kind, trade union or whatever. No one has to do any of this, put their head above the parapet, but they do. And, I was doing it for a laugh and was on the receiving end of a lot of flack, but it was so much fun. It was a real eye-opener. It was an amazing thing to do. And, the campaign we run, I thought was rock solid piece of satire. And it was
superb. It was a great idea.
And the being there, being in Margate rather, on the night of the count, was an extraordinary place to be, and stuff swirling around. It was, on reflection you think, oh, thank God we did that, because what an adventure, and what a sort of what a way of sort of fixing the act in events, which is quite interesting. But also, I'd never do it again.
No.
I must have been mad. Wouldn't dream of doing it again. What a crazy thing to have done.
No, that is fascinating. We're running out of time. I've got so many more questions, but right, where are we going next? So we're all living in strange times. It's been a horrible year.
Yes.
How have you found online gigs as opposed to live stand-up? Because you make the Monday nights for me with the quiz at the Always Be Comedy. It's just the best.
Well, I'll be, I'm going to blow a vast quantity of smoke at your brother's arse now.
He's not my brother. I wish we were.
No, it's really, really simple. It's if the gigs are well run, if they've got a good club vibe on them, where everyone knows what the rules are and how the thing works, and then they work brilliantly. I've done a variety of online stuff. The first couple I did, there was no audience, and you'd sort of do your monologue basically down the lens like this, and to nothing and to no one, and you'd think, is there anyone watching? This is like reading the news. What's the point? But then the good ones have been absolutely brilliant, and I think. Amazing. I actually think there's a sort of discovery of a format going on, of a way of doing this. And I've talked to James about this, sort of like the things that work in this format are worth continuing with.
Yeah.
Obviously nothing will ever get close to being in a stand-up club or a theatre, a packed theatre with a comic rocking it. Nothing can get close to that.
Yeah.
But what you have here is a sort of hybrid interactive version of television, if you want. And the acts that's the other thing, is the acts who have adapted to it are killing it.
Yeah.
The people who've got their heads around it are absolutely killing it. Those who haven't aren't. But it is quite it's quite a tricky proposition. And again, the ones I prefer where it's just me, so I'm setting the tone.
Yeah.
I don't have to, you know, go, hey, forget about how funny they were. I'm funny, you know, the sort of gladiatorial thing of when you're a club comic. But that's the thing I really love. I've really loved about, and particularly in where we've ended up with this quiz. And what I love about the quiz is you know, it's a Rolodex of subject matter, because you've got questions about lots of different things. So there's endless topics being thrown at me to write jokes about or to improvise jokes about.
Yeah.
Because James sends me the question, I glance at them, I don't look at them properly. I'm literally just making up as we go along. And the great thing is because the subjects move on, and because we've got such an you know, it's not an in-joke, but it's a frame of mind between the regulars and on the gallery and then the people watching. I mean, I do think, you know, it'd be very interesting to see on the if and when whether some of this streamed stuff survives and whether there's an appetite for it still. Because, you know, there's nothing I like better than going downstairs and saying, oh, I've just finished my gig in Galway and I'm back on the couch. Get back on the couch by 9:15. You know, which, if it were Galway, is basically completely impossible. And you know, I
think what might happen is when the clubs open up, they may well have one performance where you've got the online capability of doing it, so it'll be streamed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Because
exactly.
It's been so popular, and folk want to watch comedy. And might not be able to get to theatres, so you know.
Exactly.
Well, you know,
exactly. And I did a pilot for the BBC in the radio theatre. God, when was that? In October, November.
Yeah.
And we did that with a Zoom audience, and that took. We couldn't see them, but we could hear them. You know, coming out. It was on Halloween. That's right. So the laughter came out of the monitors, sort of in a ghostly style. And what was interesting about that was you could say, "Is anyone in from Northern Ireland?" Someone go, "Yes," like that, and you're like, and the producers basically saying, "This is a more diverse representative audience of the British Isles, which is what the BBC's aiming at."
Yeah.
Than when we have people come in here into the radio theatre. Because the radio theatre audience can be people, you know, damp people avoiding going home or on first dates or last dates if the show's rubbish. And, you know, and so there's maybe something's being cracked open.
Yeah.
You know,
I think so.
Maybe. I mean, who knows? Because I think there may also be a real drive to try and get things back to the way they were and drop some of the innovations that have taken place. But I don't know.
You can't beat a live show, as you say.
No.
But it's a fantastic super sub. It's a brilliant substitution.
Yeah. And James has done an amazing job with it.
He is the best at what he
Tireless.
does. Him and Tim are just fantastic every week in, week out. This is always the comedy. Just before we go, and I hadn't had a chance to talk about Fat Cops, the band that you drum in, which I have heard, and it's brilliant.
Long story.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would like to say? Do you want to mention any online gigs? Do you want to mention any podcasts?
Well, the
podcast.
If people are into
talk.
Yeah, if people are into history, the Second World War in particular, we've got a podcast called We Have Ways of Making You Talk. And even if you're not interested in the sort of nitty gritty of tank tactics in Normandy, we've got a nice thing we do on a Sunday, which is people's family stories, where they send in their stories and we read them out. Brilliant. Which I think that might you know, stimulate people's appetite for what we're doing. But mainly, I mean, the thing is, the reason there's going to be, you know, this has been a really hard year for an awful lot of people.
Yeah.
The people I've really felt for, the people who work for me, my crew, my tech, my tour manager, that's who I'm really worried about. Them, and then the comics who last Edinburgh would have been their year.
Yeah.
And it may not even exactly. It may not even happen this year if things can't get lined up properly. You know, if the vaccination hasn't worked out or whatever. or confidence doesn't return to being packed in a porta cabin with 30 other people respiring and perspiring all over them, right?
I love it. Yes.
It's, you know what I mean? It's almost like the fringe is like perfectly weaponized for spreading a respiratory virus. But and I was going to go on tour, and I was like, oh, I don't want to go on tour again. Oh God, I got to cut my hair, blah blah blah. And obviously, I've made full advantage of not cutting my hair. Oh, I've got to do that again. But suddenly, that was taken away from me, and you think, God, I do actually really love this. So, but the reason there's a possible future for stand-up is because audiences still really want it.
Exactly.
And I said earlier on, you write a show with the audience. You don't just write the show with the audience. You go to the show with the audience. You perform the show with the audience. You laugh at the show with the audience. And it's the audiences that have been the life support that have kept this whole thing going via people like James. And Matt Brown has done an amazing job in Kingston and Morden and places like that. But, that's the thing. It's the audiences. And that's the thing. Without people being into comedy, there'd be nothing for the likes of me to do. So, that's actually the thing you sort of take away from a weird year like this is that thanks to the punters, I think we're all going to be all right.
Well, it's my pleasure laughing at you. It really is.
Bless you.
Thanks,
Rich.
so much for your time. I've thoroughly
Total
enjoyed
pleasure.
it. As I say, I could talk to you all night, mate. You're
I've got a nice bolognese to get to, though.
All the best to you. All the best. Thank you so much.
Total pleasure, Rich. My pleasure. Thanks, mate.